Welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Hostler, licensed physical therapist and certified strength and mobility coach. Here you can expect to hear about all things movement. The Movement Upgraded podcast is a blend of the science of strength training, rehab, and mobility, mixed with the personal and professional experience to provide you with the steps you need to keep your body pain-free and moving well, so you can do what you love forever. Hello and welcome to this podcast episode. I really wanted to put this into a podcast because I cover this in every single patient or client that I work with, because this is basically like the journey that we travel together. And I think it's really helpful to understand these stages of learning so that we can really be able to recognize progress when we see it. And mobility work, if you have heard in many of these episodes, is really like unrewarding. And if you're sitting there like, what the heck, Jen? Like, you tell me it's rewarding and I need to do mobility work all the time. Like, you're not really selling this very well. I'm a realist and I'm not going to oversell things because it's really hard work. And when I say it's unrewarding, I mean like immediate results, right? We live in like an Amazon Prime Now type of lifestyle where we expect results immediately. And that's just not the way that our bodies work. And mobility work is slow as molasses. It's like watching paint dry. It's like millimeters of progress over time. Like, it's just like little baby steps. And so being able to recognize some of those steps when they occur is really important, because that's the motivation that can keep us going. And when it comes to doing things like movement in general, our bodies are not wanting us to do them. Our body's goal is to keep us alive first and foremost. And one of the ways it does that is minimizes energy expenditure. So if you think you're lazy, it's because you are, but only because you're supposed to be, because that's the way that nature has evolved, right? And so mobility work is like, our body doesn't want us to do that. Our body wants us to chill on the couch and do nothing because it is going to conserve energy. So you're already having a huge resistance, just like primally, naturally, to wanting to move. And so we have to find those little things that like incentivize us and keep us going. So that's why I wanted to make this entire podcast on the 4 stages of learning a new skill, or the 4 stages of learning in mobility work. And I think it's really helpful to be able to understand these. And this is something we go through very extensively in movement school as well. And I go through it because it is so important. So without further ado, let's talk about the 4 stages. So I'm going to go through them and then we'll talk about what they look like, and then signs of progress for each one of them. So the first one, and this, by the way, pulling back real quick, this model, I don't remember who came up with the model. I can't give credit because I don't recognize that. I did not come up with this. So I usually try to give credit where it's due. I just don't think we do enough of that in this world, and it drives me crazy. So I would give credit if I knew where it was, but I just am going to say I didn't come up with it. And then the second thing is this applies to everything you learn, any new skill you're learning. Which, by the way, like on another side note, I don't know why we think we're supposed to be good at everything we try as adults. I was reading something the other day about that, and it's so true, because people will come in my office and they're just like, I'm just not getting the hang of this spine segmentation. And I look at them I'm kind of blatant when I talk to people, and I'm just like, why would you expect to be good at it? And I don't even mean that to be mean. I just, like, seriously, why do we think we would be good at spine segmentation? We don't move our spines. I'm still not even the greatest at spine segmentation, but I don't expect myself to be, because I don't practice it a crazy amount, and I still have reps to learn, right? So just keep that in mind as adults. Like, I think there's this impending pressure for us to be good at everything we do and good at everything we try. I'm sure it's deeply rooted in a lot of different things, but I'm just here to remind you that you're not supposed to be, and mobility work is literally finding the things that you suck at and doing those. So do not have high pressure on yourself to get good at these things and to get results right away. Just kind of pay attention to these 4 stages and see if there is some form of progress as you're learning, because that's really what we're looking for. And without any more tangents here, for the next couple of seconds as we go through the stages at least, let's get to them. So the first one is going to be subconscious incompetence. Subconscious incompetence just means you're unaware. That's the subconscious part of your incompetence or your inability to do something. The next one is going to be conscious incompetence. So now you're aware of the thing, but you still are doing it wrong or you're unable to do it. Then we have conscious competence. So now you have to put effort into it, but as long as you try, you can do the thing. You are competent in being able to complete the task or the skill. And then last but not least, we have subconscious competence. This is, we don't have to think about it. It now is integrated and we're able to do it without thinking about it. This is, again, every skill that we learn. So let's talk about what this looks like with mobility work. So subconscious incompetence basically is you now. It's most people before they come into my office, they have no idea that they don't have control of their bodies. And the way that I'm going to explain a lot of this is through cars, because it's one of the easiest, not easiest, but like most clear depictions of this. People will come in my office and maybe they already do some cars, but I'll come and assess them. And so they'll be like, having no idea that they're compensating, or that every time I asked them to move their shoulder, their back was going all over the place. So that is them not being aware that when I asked them to move their shoulder, they were moving their back. So they're unable to only move their shoulder. That is subconscious incompetence. They're not aware of it. In my office, in the first assessment, my goal is to move everybody from subconscious incompetence to the next one, which is conscious incompetence. So I want them to be aware. I want them to just learn and see what they're doing. The ways that I do this a lot of times is going to be obviously telling them and showing them, but I will demo. But lately, as of a couple years ago, what I would do is actually record them and show them. So I would record a video of them and I would show them in slow-mo and I kind of tell them what to see, basically make them all mini movement experts. And I work luckily with people who like really are interested in this. So they're like, this is really cool and this is really helpful. And once I do that, they are automatically in that next stage, right? They're automatically now in conscious incompetence. So they're aware of it, they see it, but they're still obviously going to be doing it not wrong. I don't like the word wrong or right, but they're still doing not a shoulder car if their back is moving, right? So that is the second level. Now, the third level is going to be conscious competence. This is your ability now to do the shoulder car without your back moving, right? To do an actual shoulder car. That's the conscious ability to do it. Moving from conscious incompetence to conscious competence usually looks like inconsistently being able to do it sometimes, or just having a little bit less compensations sometimes. So that's going to be the progress. It's a lot of effort, and you're inconsistently able to do it. And ways of progress that you can measure here is pretty much just being like, oh, I like 1 out of every 5 cars, I can do it really well. And maybe now I can do like 3 in a row where it's really good. Or maybe I can get a little bit further in my range of motion before I start to compensate somewhere else, right? Those are progress signs. And that is like a sign that you're moving into that conscious competence. When you finally moved into that stage is when you're like pretty much every time, as long as you're super effortful, you can do your car pretty like consistently without compensating everywhere else, right? So it still takes a lot of effort though. For us to fully move into the subconscious competence, it would have to be something we don't have to think about as much. So maybe when we're doing like our lifts or doing other things, we don't use our backs without having to think about it as much. Ultimately, for most people, like you're almost never going to reach that level because our body is going to compensate because it's going to take path of least resistance. So there's not like a perfect movement. So keep in mind that like we're constantly pursuing a little bit better. Like we're pursuing the subconscious competence, knowing that like perfection doesn't exist, which is actually a Japanese term, I believe, called kodawari. It's like pursuit of perfection, knowing it doesn't exist. So we're constantly kind of pursuing that, trying to have to think less as we're doing it. That's the sign that we're moving and progressing into there, is when you're like, okay, it's less cognitive effort. Like it's not so hard for my brain, and I'm able to actually do the thing with less effort. So that's signs of progress, moving from that conscious competence towards the subconscious competence. And it's just requiring less and less effort mentally to do the movement that you want, and eventually just like being able to do the movement without thinking about it hardly at all. That does happen sometimes. But again, we're going to operate most of our cars, for example, which is what I'm using a lot in this, from the perspective of constantly trying to do a little bit better. So, that's something to keep in mind. So the one more time for the review of these stages, we move from subconscious incompetence to conscious incompetence once you're aware of the thing that you were doing, aware of the compensation you were doing, aware of what you were doing wrong, right? You can actually see it. As soon as you can see it or as soon as you can feel it, we are now moving into that conscious incompetence. Moving from conscious incompetence to conscious competence is, now that I see it, I'm actually able to do it. So being able to translate that into action is going to be moving towards that. And signs, again, that we're moving there is just slowly being able to more consistently do the thing that we want. In like maybe a mobility exercise, like a lift off, you're able to sometimes lift off the leg or lift up without moving anything, but you're not always able to. So that's slowly working your way into that. And then from conscious competence to subconscious competence, we are moving from being able to have to really think about the movement and the thing that we're doing to, okay, it's less mental effort. It's a little bit more ease. I don't have to focus so hard and I'm able to do it. So those are the ways that I usually have people traverse along when it comes to cars. There's a lot of ways that we think about this when I'm doing lifts as well. Once we kind of start to do a little bit of mobility work, they notice that like a lot of people kind of get stuck in like squats where they have to really physically or mentally, cognitively think about their squats so hard so that it feels good versus like giving them more options. They tend to not have to think about it as hard. And so they're able to kind of move more into that subconscious competence stage a little bit better. Which is one of the reasons that I like mobility work. But that's essentially like the trajectory or the pathway and how to kind of monitor your progress. I've talked before in monitoring progress also is just like habit formation, because sometimes just knowing that if you are consistent, you will reap the benefits. So just doing your cars, even if you're not getting a lot better at them because you don't have the cognitive energy to put into doing them really well and intensely, is still good for your body. So you still get benefit out of doing your cars, even if you're half-assing them. I use the word half-assed because that's what I think of when I'm not really focusing on them. And at the end of the year, 100 half-assed cars, like sessions are going to be significantly better for your body than 100 that you just completely skipped because you were like, well, I can't do them perfectly, right? So we want to get away from that all or nothing mindset and remember that yes, habits matter, but so does like just the slow little progress signs of, I was able to do it more consistently, or it didn't take as much mental energy there. And that's kind of like how we progress along with mobility work. And this also brings me to remind you that when we are learning a new skill, it's so cognitively effortful that it's exhausting, and mobility work is definitely this way. And I think something that we don't consider a lot when it comes to fitness is the cognitive load that different fitness forms or ways of achieving fitness that the different ones have on us. And sometimes our consistency or lack thereof with fitness can have to do with the mental or cognitive load that it requires. So I know personally for mobility work, that's like the highest cognitive load that I possibly could have, depending on what it is, but pails and rails and liftoffs are the highest load. They're the least comfortable for me. They're the ones that I cut out and don't require myself to do when I am really not wanting to do it. Cars is going to be up there. Stretches is a little bit lower. It's not as much cognitive effort. The stretches that I know that I need. And so I will sometimes, if I know that I don't have a lot of real estate cognitively or mentally, I will cut out some of my mobility work and I will find ways to make it a little bit less taxing for me for some reason, for a lot of reasons that we can understand, mainly because it's less energy, but doing my cars on the ground is like very cognitively like a little bit easier. Like I don't have to stand. It just feels a little bit less resistance. So I will just bring them down to the ground. And just keep in mind that there's nothing wrong with making things easier just to get them in. Because especially if you're newer with mobility work, it's just, it's really hard. You have to physically force yourself to create this internal resistance or this internal drive, and you don't get the external reward for example, let's take pails and rails. So the I in pails and rails stands for isometric, which means there's no movement. We have 3 different types of muscle contractions: concentric, which means the muscle shortening; eccentric, which means the muscle's lengthening; and isometric, which means there's cross bridges, just cycling. We're not having any movement. If there's no movement, we don't see anything, but we're working really hard. That's what pails and rails are. Usually I have people working at least like 50% of their intensity, and very often at like 70 to 80% plus. And that's a lot of internal drive to see no movement. But when we're doing other exercises, we see movement. So it's almost like we get like a little, I don't want to call it like a dopamine hit, but maybe that's what it is, of like, okay, I'm doing a thing. I can see myself moving. I can see this weight moving. Versus pails and rails, you don't have that. So there is a high cognitive load when you are learning mobility work. And so if that's you and you're just like, what the heck? I hate this stuff. Like, it's not just you. I promise. Like, it's not you. It's everybody. It's all of my clients. And sometimes they are doing their pails rails, like kicking and screaming in our sessions. And I'm like, it's okay. If you want to cuss me out, it's okay. If you want to complain about it, I'm that way in my sessions too. I don't take offense to it. It's totally fine, because it sucks. Like, there's a high cognitive load. We are usually, as a population, very mentally taxed. If you're in the United States, especially lately, we're very mentally taxed. So you know what? Do what you can, but also remember that these little stages of learning will get better, right? So depending on where you are in this stage of learning, hopefully it can kind of help you realize, oh, it just feels like it's extra for me because I'm new and I'm only in the conscious incompetence and I'm barely able to do things competently, consistently. And so if I just show up, it'll get better. And that's what I want you to know. Like, the resistance will lower as you get more competent in the skill. So take this information and apply it to whatever you would like when it comes to learning, but especially with mobility work. I think it kind of helps us to reduce the pressure of ourselves to do things perfectly all the time, because that's silly and asinine. We're not going to be good at mobility work. And also, if you're good at mobility work, you're not doing the right mobility work. It's supposed to be hard as fuck. Like, it's really supposed to be so hard that you're just like questioning your existence in the world. Maybe not that hard, but it's like very difficult. So so don't be hard on yourself. You're not going to be great at mobility work. If you are, maybe need to like progress your mobility work a little bit. And hopefully you can kind of identify some signs of progress for yourself, or if you're a coach or a clinician, some signs of progress with your clients. Highly recommend, if you are a coach or a clinician listening to this, that you talk about these different stages with your clients, talk about the path that they're going to go through as they're learning these things, because oh my gosh, when I started physical therapy, I didn't know that I would have, I had no idea that all of this was involved. So now I tell people that, and identifying those and kind of naming them is really helpful for most of my clients. So spend a little extra time if you can, explain those things to them, help them realize that this is all part of the process, and they're not going to just improve their reps and see this muscle definition like we do in fitness. It's going to be like weeks and months of like slowly making progress like this. And I think for a lot of people, it helps to manage their expectations a little bit, which makes them happier. It makes them more likely to be consistent, and it makes your day a little bit better, right? Because then they're not yelling at you for not getting results. So communication is always key. So if you, obviously, if you loved this podcast, send it to somebody who did. If you want to tell me about what you loved about it, please reach out to me. I love hearing from you. If you haven't gone and reviewed the podcast, go hit that 5-star review, drop a little review for me. I appreciate it if you already have so much, because these podcasts are a lot of work, but I also really love them, and I love that you love them, and I love hearing that you love them. Like, it's just great to know that this information is helpful, which is a very important core value of mine. So without further ado, I will end this podcast, and I will talk to you on the next one.